hello, everybody. It's been one heck of a wonderful day, hasn't it? And I was informed just as I was coming out that I'm the last live speaker. Okay, now that can really scare you a bit, especially given all the amazing speakers who came before. But I did want to start by thanking Pat, Vicki, and Ron, actually, because it's been amazing. And you are so visionary. I don't know if you even know how visionary you are to help our field by pulling people together. Understanding that communication of these ideas is critical to moving the needle forward. Thank you from all of us. I've also learned today that Pat has a new career. He's going to be emceeing from now on, and he's giving up his job as a neuroscientist. So I'm actually here to add some levity, and the levity is going to come by talking about play as a way of rethinking a 21st century education. And there's no better way to start that than to play. So, ready, guys? All right, so there's a new book that came out called Wonderland. Did you all hear about it? Stephen Johnson's Wonderland. And he suggested to us that sometimes these really frivolous things that we do can have a whole lot more meaning infused in them than we could ever imagine. So I thought I would put all of you to the test. So all I want you to do is to follow what I do. Y'all cool? Okay, hands ready? Here we go. That was outstanding. All right, now, what did you do? Clap. That is the standard answer, and you did a very good job of answering it. But I'm going to suggest to you that you actually did something much deeper than that. I'm going to ask you to change the lens. Pat Cool talked this morning about patterns. And in fact, what just happened is you all recognized a pattern. And you gave the pattern back to me. Oh, wait a minute. There was something else I think I heard in a number of the talks. Was it called synchrony? Well, guess what, guys? If I looked at your brains right now, I would see synchrony just bursting out, lighting up, because you all showed me collaboration. You showed me synchrony. You showed me precisely the kind of stuff through which those social foundations, and that was just a clapping game. Now I'm going to give you one more little clapping game that's going to be just a pinch harder, and this time I'm going to clap once, you clap twice. But if I clap twice, you clap once. So everyone got the instructions? All right? Sounds really easy, right? Ready? I noticed that hesitation in the last one. Okay. And in fact, that was by design. That leads in, you remember all these talks we heard on executive function this morning and impulse control? Well, you just felt it. That's precisely what we're talking about. We even do have tapping tasks that we use to get across these ideas. Well, let's just try one more. This time I'd like to introduce you to the beautiful kinds of artwork that we see from our young children. Now, you might know them as Smooshes that your kids bring home from preschool. And you're great, right? You tell your kid what a wonderful smush it is, and then you immediately put it on the refrigerator door, correct? You've been there. But again, I'd like you to look a little bit closer at this seemingly frivolous smush and ask whether Marley might be telling us something. All right? It actually turns out that in order to do this little beautiful piece in the middle, she had to have the intent to do it, and she had to keep her hand down. Because if she didn't keep her hand down and she just kept pounding at the paper, she couldn't do this. And notice at the gorgeousness of this design. You see these spatial patterns there? I mean, really, she could have just taken the same color and gone over and over again. But she didn't do that. She decided to do something that's way more artistic. So the next time that you see Smooshes, look more carefully at them. Dig in and say, it may be frivolity to some, but to me, it is Picasso. All right, so moving on, what I want to suggest today in the talk more broadly is that it is indeed time to change the lens. Time to change the lens and the way we think of learning and education in and out of school, and to think about how we might foster this new version and vision of education through play. Lest I start with why I think it's so important to go here. The world has changed, and the world has changed so dramatically. It turns out that knowledge is now doubling every 2.5 years. So if you happen to educate children in a way that says, memorize and spit back, and I could somehow even give you all the facts that existed in the world today, in just 2.5 years, you'd be down to 50%. In 5 years? In 7.5 years? Can you see that it's a diminishing quantity? And that means that if we learn in that way, we're going to be in trouble. Factoids, well, they are important for learning your multiplication table. They can't be the primary core way in which we educate kids anymore. Kids have to do learning to learn. We have to think about integration and innovation as key. And in fact, there was a beautiful book that came out in 2006. It was a book that was originally written for the business community by a man named Daniel Pink. And I love the way he talks about this change. This became, by the way, a hit, but it was more a hit in the education field than it was in the business community. He wrote, the past few decades have belonged to a certain kind of person with a certain kind of mind. Computer programmers who could crank code, lawyers who could craft contracts, don't worry about your jobs, it's really okay, and MBAs who could crunch numbers. But I love this line. He says, the keys to the kingdom are changing hands. And he says it in a way that reminds me of some of what Dr. Kuhl talked about earlier. Pat said, maybe we should consider music. Maybe music is important. Maybe patterns are important. In fact, in one of the major medical schools in Philadelphia, they now tell me that they're not just looking for analytical thinkers. They're looking for artists. Because they said that a lot of what can be done in diagnoses can be picked up, dare I say, on WebMD. All right? That computers are getting smarter. And Watson is working with the medical community. But what Watson's not as good at is picking up the global patterns over time. It's a different way of thinking. So I ask you, are we preparing our children for the workplace of tomorrow? And I'd like to make the argument that we are not. And that's because I think we are stuck in what I will call the traditional view of success. The traditional view of success that we walk around with is that I want to prepare you so you will do well in reading, writing, and arithmetic. And that means you've got to be pressed through your early years so that you'll be smart enough to do well in the test. Let's call that the traditional way of thinking. But one day I noticed that in the lovely country called Canada to the north, they were thinking out a new definition of what it meant to succeed. And I modify it only briefly here. The 21st century way, that we want happy, healthy thinking, caring. Notice the caring piece that's come out in so many of the talks you've heard. And social children who will become collaborative, creative, competent, and responsible citizens tomorrow. Notice that thinking is in that definition of success. I did not leave it out. But notice that it's only one piece of what's in the definition of success. Now, we can ask the question of whether our traditional view of success has really taken us anywhere. How good has it served our children? And Pasi Salzberg, who works in Finland, who's been one of the main advisors for the Finnish education system, urges us that it hasn't worked real well for us. These are the Pisa scores of, and you can see this is a line representing the different countries as they go up on the Pisa scores. And you can look hard for the US. Have you all got it? Find it stuck there in the middle? Stuck in the middle with you? Right, there you go. And you might notice where Canada is. Okay, there she is. And Finland right up there at the top. These PISA scores are given to 15-year-olds who take it all around the world. And it's actually not such a bad test. So it hasn't really worked for us. And so what my collaborator, Roberta Golenkoff, and I did is we said, well, let's look to see whether we could define this new way of thinking about success for the 21st century, and how would it jive both with where the science is at the moment, if we could distill thousands and thousands of articles in the science, and also be thinking about how the science of early childhood makes contact with the thinking that's going on in the business community. So that was our goal. In picking the skills that we picked those that were grounded in the science, that were integrative in a way of thinking about a whole child, critically important. Andy mentioned that earlier. And we also wanted things that were going to be malleable, that you could actually change. If you did something in the environment that was to help parents, we could move them toward a different way of interacting with kids, and we could help the kids move in ways that were going to lead toward the kind of success that we're talking about. We came up with 6 such skills. And you'll notice at the top left is what you've been hearing about all day long. It all starts with the social brain. It all starts with the social gateway as a foundation for all the learning that we're going to do, for building the relationship, for building the bond, for building the community. And there we also get emotion regulation. Communication is built upon collaboration, because you can't communicate if you have no one to communicate with. And that includes not only blabbing, but listening. And we are great blabbers. I mean, you know, there's Facebook, there's blogs. Do people really care what we had for breakfast? But moving on. From communication and collaboration, we build content. And the content is not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but it includes the arts as well. And it's not just the memorization of material, it's also how you use that material and how you learn it. So executive function skills like attention, memory, planning, and flexibility that Stephanie talked about so beautifully today. But if there's that much content, we're told now that we are reading up to the equivalent of 174 newspapers per day, that you have to learn to sift through it, critical thinking, and there are models of critical thinking in our field of developmental psychology. And that then breeds creative innovation, learning to put these ropes together in new ways to generate novelty. And then under confidence, in these 6 C's, we put grit and persistence and growth mindset. Again, well-worn concepts that we have in developmental psychology that start in the crib and can take us to the boardroom. And where do these come together? Well, it turns out that you can really build a lot of these skills through playful learning. But as you know, play is under siege. Somewhere in the last 2-3 decades, play literally became a 4-letter word. The Alliance for Childhood in 2009 did a survey of 142 classrooms in New York, 112 in LA, right here. And what did they find? This was kindergarten. Let me remind you that it is kindergarten. They found that 25% of the teachers reported having 0 time in their classrooms for play. 61% of the New York teachers said they don't even give kids a chance to have choice time. And we can tell you what it's being replaced by, because 79% of the kindergarten teachers spend time on test prep. Yes, you heard it right, test prep. So you say, ooh, that was in 2009. I bet it's gotten better since. But no, no, no. Bassuck et al. Came out in paper 2016 that reported kindergarten's really now the new first grade. Well, look at that. 80% of teachers now say the kids should be reading by the time that they're in kindergarten. Time for arts? You know those arts we were talking about earlier? Down 16% since 1998. And testing. Testing's up by 29%. And of course, this feeds down into the entire world that we live in. I mean, you can't even do potty training anymore without having apps. And look at that, beautiful. It has a little room for your iPad. Now, have any of you guessed what this is? Baby Pod. I'm telling you, when I first heard it, I thought, impossible. It is a tampon device. And you can use it if you're pregnant, and there's a microphone, and you can speak into the microphone. So your child can be learning in the womb. Okay? Ruth, we have whole new things for you to study. Oh my God. So, I'm going to suggest, I know you want to leave it up, like you want to check me on this, right? Okay, so I swear to God. Okay, it's time to think about more time for play and playful learning and changing our definition of success. All right, the definition that I've been using is to talk about playful learning. And playful learning for me has time and space for both free play and for what I'm going to call guided play. Let me briefly tell you what each of these is. In free play, whether objects, fantasy, make-believe, physical, you can see that it is pleasurable and enjoyable. And I think, Pat, you were the one who raised that earlier. I mean, why not have fun? Has no extrinsic goals, is spontaneous, evokes active engagement. This is really important, that it's what we call in our field active learning. And the young kid has agency or control over that learning. It's generally all engrossing, has a private reality, is non-literal, and can contain make-believe. Guided play, which is the piece that we add, is also a lot of fun. But it's a little bit different in that there can be an educational goal involved. So, for example, when you visit a Montessori school, they have very clear goals as to what they want out of the activity, and they have planned what the kids are going to play with so that it's more likely than not that they land on those goals. Similarly, when you go to a children's museum, there was a lot of thought that went into each and every activity and exhibit in the children's museum. So there's a goal in mind. But the kids go in there with the agency to go explore and have a good time. So that's what we mean by guided play. It can also be that adult who's hanging in there with you and is playing with you, and hopefully not like in Stephanie's parents who are over there and leave the kid with no autonomy, but you leave the kid with autonomy and you're like a coach rather than a director. So that's how we've defined it. And it lands us in a kind of 2x2. So we can think of learning that is initiated by either an adult or a child and directed by a child or an adult. If it's initiated by a child, the kid goes into the living room and builds a fort, and it is directed by the child, that's what we call free play. If it's initiated by an adult and it's directed by the child in that environment, it's what we call guided play. If it's initiated by a child, but the adult comes in and takes over, like you saw in the earlier videos, we call that co-opted play. And if it's adult-adult, we call that direct instruction. Even if it's dressed up in play clothes, it's still direct instruction. Hapgood once called it, I love this name, chocolate-covered broccoli. All right, the research that we're doing in my lab suggests that playful learning can enhance social regulation, that collaboration piece, language and literacy, the communication piece, STEM, which is content, and even hypothesis testing like critical thinking, among others. So I thought I would just give you a sampler of some of the work that's coming out in the play literature. Here's some that's coming out by Bedrova and Leong, that also was studied by Adele Diamond and by Clancy Blair, on whether kids can learn this EF, this executive function stuff, when you're playing. And in fact, they use the tools of the mind approach, which takes playful learning through the school day. And when you take playful learning through the school day, where the adult has a goal in mind, but the kid has the agency, in fact, they learn the skills that are these EF skills, and they also do better on the standardized tests of math and reading. Here you see a beautiful example. Do you see how the one kid's holding an ear and the other kid is holding a mouth? Well, the kid who has the mouth can talk, and the kid who has the ear is supposed to be the listener and not jump in. And then they trade. and the next kid gets to do it. There's also, and I gave you this example earlier, in the clapping game, there's beautiful work by Meg McClellan where she has kids playing in an orchestra or doing a drum circle, and then she tests the kids who were in the condition of doing the drum circle and the kids who were not in the condition of doing the drum circle, and who had better executive function skills and who had better tests on standardized scores. You say, okay, cool. So it looks like executive function works, but what about language and literacy outcomes? Well, it turns out that even there, by singing songs and by engaging in dramatic play, we can have kids learning many more vocabulary words. When you're King Arthur and you're playing like you're part of the Knights in the Round Table, even as a she, Queen Arthur, all right, then Queen Arthur can actually do a magnificent job of learning different roles and different words, like the moats, right? And they understand what it means to have, what do they call it, crintadels or something on the castles? I don't even know the words. But the kids can come out with these words that you'd never expect them to know because they're learning by doing. We actually created such a game to help kids learn vocabulary in a chutes and ladders game. And the important graph to look at, and we made it really fun, I promise, even if they weren't playing the game. We were really excited. But over here is the kids playing the game, and over here, the number of words that were learned by the kids who were just getting a flashcard drill and kill. The playful learning worked. What about STEM? Everybody's talking STEM and STEAM. So we've been looking at that as well. Some of our colleagues have actually even found that playing board games can make a difference for how young kids do in certain mathematical tests. Isn't that great? So all that Candyland that you played actually made a difference. We actually have been studying block play, and it turns out that even blocks can afford many wonderful, if we look deeper, skills that kids might not otherwise have. Example, simply by having the blocks in the environment, simply by playing with your kids and your grandkids with blocks, means that you're using words you don't even know you're using. Like put the red one next to the green one. Put the blue on top of the purple one. And those terms turn out to be really important. In, around, through, on top of, under, next to, because it turns out that having that vocabulary, which the kids have if you have it, is related not only to later spatial ability, but also to later mathematical ability. Turns out in our lab we found out that at age 3, there is not just a 30 million word gap, but maybe there's a 20,000 block gap. The kids who are from low-income environments seem to be well behind their peers because they haven't gotten the sort of experiences that are going to help them get these terms and build math. And you say, does it really matter? Well, get this. We found that at age 3, when we looked at their ability to do these block designs, 2D and 3D, we add executive function to the mix, and we can predict 78% of what you're going to look like in your kindergarten readiness math scores. That's like incredible. So it turns out that it matters to have these experiences. And what about critical thinking? This is just a wonderful gadget gizmo that was done by several of our colleagues. Guan, Goodman, Spelke, and Schultz is this version. It's a toy, but the toy has 4 functions. Oh, in one, you might have a little thing that lifts up and you can see a mirror. And in another, you have a little button that you push and it will make a sound. And in another, you turn something and it'll have a light. 4 different features. And in one case, I say to the kid, "Hi, look what this does. If you lift this up, you can see the mirror." And then I put it back down. And then I let the kid play with the toy and I see what the kid does with it. Well, the other kids just get the toy. They're just supposed to play with it. They've gotten some sort of instructions, but it doesn't help them at all. So it's even in time. And now they have to explore what's going on. I promise I'll be quick. Maybe not too quick. Give me a couple more minutes. And they have to explore the toy to see, does anybody come up with all 4 functions? And the answer is, these kids, they just keep doing the same old thing they were taught. But these kids become little scientists, and they explore and discover all 4 functions that the toy has to offer. Importantly, it's not all play. In fact, some of the electronic toys get in the way. And when they get in the way, kids then don't interact as much. The toy takes over rather than just being a platform for play. So let's ask for a moment, why might it work? Well, big idea 1 is, well, look, play is active, it's engaging, it's all engrossing. It gets you to attend more. Number 2, well, guided play is like constrained tinkering. I love that term. Constrained tinkering. It lessens the noise around you, and it allows you to sort of test things in a more constrained space, sort of, again, like what we do as scientists. Big idea 3. Well, maybe guided play just creates a kind of mise en place for us. It creates a setting where it's just something that we want to learn. So we're going to go after it. We're prepared to learn. We walk in the room ready to learn. And number 4, playful learning is joyful. It's positive. It makes us happy, so we want to do more. The last is that we can then play out the 6 C's again. And maybe, just maybe, play helps us to unite the suite of skills, each interdependent, each dynamic. And if we have these suite of skills, and we have a way of looking at them developmentally, we can use play to grow education for the 21st century. Well, we're doing just that right now in 2 projects that I wanted to tell you about, very briefly. We've decided to take the 6 C's as a model and see if you could actually put playful learning out in the community. This is example 1. We decided to go into what are called trapped spaces, like supermarkets. You gotta go. Laundromats. We've also been in hospital clinics. These are some of our signs. All they do is prompt that kind of conversation that we have said is so important. It says things like, hi, I'm a cow. You know, milk comes from a cow. What else do you think comes from a cow? And we just had the signs up, or we had the signs down. When the signs were up in low-income environments, we got a 33% increase in conversation among parents and kids than when the signs were down. I'm trying, I only have 2 more, I promise. And I promise. I promise. I'm only a couple minutes over. All right, so the last one I wanted to show you was what we're calling urban Thinkscape, which is part of our learning landscapes idea. And here we're asking if you can marry architecture with cognitive science by putting the experience right out there on the street in bus stops. Here you see 2 examples, our puzzle bench, where you could actually get that STEM learning while you're waiting for the bus. And over here, you see the animated street light, where you turn a dial and the animation appears on the street below. All right, in sum, time to change the lens about learning, to recognize the value of play. And I want to thank my funders and my collaborator, Roberta Galenkoff, who has been with me through all this craziness. Thank you all.